And hello and welcome to Arts and Entertainment. I'm Deborah Gilbert, your host, and as always, thanks so much for being here. Well, I have a great show for you today. You probably haven't heard about this wonderful theater. It's called the Fuse Theater of Connecticut, and I hope that you get to enjoy learning all about it. And Laura Morton, the co-founder and artistic director, and Jonna Capone, the actor, model, and influencer, are my guests today. And I want to get that right before I say hello to the ladies. And hello, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having us.
It's wonderful. Laura and Jonna, what I said to you before we start the show is that I like to introduce the viewer to my guests first. So Laura, why don't you take us back into your history? Tell us about yourself.
Okay, I was raised in Madison, Connecticut for most of my childhood and teenage years. Graduated Daniel Penn High School. Then I went off to college in New York State, where I studied English and theater arts with an emphasis on directing. When I graduated college, I actually got offered a position as the assistant director and facilitator of the mental health players. They're now called the Mental Health Association Players, where I would train actors, volunteer actors in the community of all ages and all backgrounds to perform realistic programs that address some sort of social, psychological, familial, societal issue. And then we would get the audience talking to the actors in character, and it was really fascinating where that went. But while doing that, I learned a lot about improv. I learned to be a much better actor because improv, I believe, really helps you when it comes to realism and acting.
Yep.
And I also learned how to teach. So when I came back to Connecticut, I was doing some of that work. I started teaching after-school programs, some like charter schools, that kind of thing, directing here and there. I sort of like did a little of this and a little of that, and I had always wanted to have a theater company ultimately. I really just wanted to start something of my own, but I didn't know if that could happen or how it would happen. So over the years, I've done numerous things. I'm a freelance artist. I direct, I teach, I coach, I face paint at children's parties. I do a little of this, a little of that to cull together a living that makes me feel happy and fulfilled, that I also feel is contributing something positive to society. Because I think for me, that's the only thing that works. I've tried other things, they don't work. So fast forward to now, or to 2019, an opportunity, a window opened up in the universe that made it possible to start a theater company. And we started a theater company, and our first production ever, Disney's The Lion King Jr., because I have an educational background and I'm particularly good at working with middle school and elementary school students, had 5 sold-out performances that were canceled by COVID.
Oh.
So we were to open on March 20th, 2020, and we were like ready to go. These kids were wonderful. We had beautiful costumes. Like, it was phenomenal. And we got shut down.
Yeah.
So a lot of what has transpired since is actually just, I look back on that as something of a blessing for us, because we had to really reevaluate who we want to be as a company. And we discovered that an educational theater isn't our primary goal, right? It is, we want to be able to create like original works or reinvent existing works, do stuff that really interests us and challenges our audiences. And so I'll talk more about that in the future, but I am the artistic director and co-founder of Fuse Theater of Connecticut, and I'm very proud of what we have accomplished. And and so now we're doing a production of Falsettos, and that brings us to Jonna, who is in that production. So feel free to ask her about herself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jonna, yes, please, tell us about yourself.
Absolutely. So I was born and raised in Massachusetts, actually, and then my family moved to North Carolina, and school brought me back to Kentucky to study operatic voice and vocal performance. And then I ended up actually leaving kind of the opera world, if you will, and falling madly in love with musical theater. And so that brought me to New York City at NYU, the Steinhardt School, and I went through that program, and that's what brought me back up to New England. I was in New York, Manhattan area for 5 years until COVID, good old COVID happened, and it actually brought me back to North Carolina for what was supposed to be 2 weeks, ended up being 7 months. because everything was shut down. And my agent at the time said, hey, you know, it looks like things are going to open up eventually. You need to come back. But the city was still very much so on lockdown. And I talked to a few friends, a few actor friends of mine, and they said, have you ever thought about living in Connecticut? And I said, no, but I'll definitely check it out. And I moved to Connecticut with my partner, and he and I have loved it, and we've been here for almost 3 years now, which is wild to think about. And I started doing, getting back into theater, and Fuse is actually the first production I will be doing in Connecticut, which is just, it's been such an incredible honor and pleasure to be a part of this theater company in general. But that'll be very exciting. I'm very happy to get back on stage. But I do have a background, like I said, with vocal performance, operatic studies, and then musical theater. And then I just hopped into plus size modeling when I was in New York. And I've been doing plus size modeling and influencing for the past 5 years now as well. So that is kind of up to date where we are right now, is being a part of this production and doing that. So.
You should see her bridal shoots. They are stunning.
I bet they are.
Glamour,
Thank
glamour,
you.
glamour.
Oh my goodness. It's like been one of my biggest, my most favorite is to do that.
Amazing.
Yeah. So.
People are probably saying, Fuse Theater, never heard of it. What the heck are you talking about? So why don't we take a moment, tell us about it.
Sure. That's not surprising because we don't have a large building that says Fuse Theater of Connecticut. That actually, again, was a blessing, because if we had had a building to try to support during the pandemic, we probably wouldn't be sitting here right now, because everything that we brought in through grants and fundraising, ticket sales would have gone just to keep the lights on and the roof over our head. So being a nomadic theater company, which if you don't know is a theater company that sort of like, every time we do a show, we look at the show and we look at spaces, and if two of them seem to be a great marriage, then we put them together. Falsettos is going to be at Bergamo's Community Theater in New Haven. It's off of Blatchley Avenue, off of State Street. It's a really cool location. It's an old factory. And our last show was there, Songs for New World, and audiences really loved it. It's a really funky, artistic, interesting environment. And I kept looking at it and going, kind of see our next show here if I do things a little differently, which I am, and I'll get to that. But after The Lion King Jr., just to take it back a little bit, when that shut down, I had all these children and teenagers, some of whom had never done theater before, who had been working every weekend for 5 months on that show, and I couldn't, in my heart and soul, just shut it down on them and let them think that all that work goes nowhere. So I spoke to our rep at Music Theater International, and he's like, finish your show. So we ended up doing like a film version of it, and I spent the entire summer, when I say the entire summer, from the moment I woke up until like 4 in the morning every night, editing a film version of it, culled together from little patchwork stuff that I had filmed during our rehearsal process. I had actors come and put on their masks, and they filmed them in music video style in my backyard. We did the finale with the entire cast in like face masks out of African fabric, dancing African dance in my backyard. And I kind of loved the process, and I loved the finished product. To this day, when I sit down and watch it, I just get emotional, because we captured the spirit of that story in a really interesting way, you know, and it works. And it was really just for the families and for the kids to have closure. Like, we couldn't really show it to the greater public, but that whole process got me thinking, I'd like to do this again. And since we're shut down and we can't do anything live, and I love me some musical theater, and I love me some Shakespeare, I asked a friend of mine who's a composer, Lydia Arachne, who is the writer, performer. She's a multi-instrumentalist, that's the word, of the band Semaphora, which is a Connecticut-based band. And I asked her if she would be interested in writing original music to a Shakespeare comedy. And she's like, tell me more, I need more information. I'm like, I don't have it, because if you say no, I'm not doing it. So she said yes, and we started bringing together people who we know, great creative people, phenomenal costumers, phenomenal scenic artists. My creative counterpart, Noah Golden, who's currently the president of Fuse, and the director of our last show. He's a video editor, as well as an actor and a musician and a writer himself, all the things. And we just got together in a Zoom room, and we started throwing things against the wall. And we ended up creating an original musical set during the pandemic. It's set in July of 2020 when everything is shut down, because the play Midsummer Night's Dream is very much about miscommunication. And so what we did is, rather than pretend we weren't on Zoom or we weren't communicating through these apps, we embraced it, and the entire story is told through various apps. We tell it through YouTube, Instagram, FaceTime, Zoom, everything. The entire story is digital, and the fairies actually live inside the internet, and they mess with us by like spamming and phishing us and like sending false messages.
I love that.
And so we just started asking ourselves, like, how do we solve this problem? Like, how do we solve the problem of the woods? A lot of it happens in the woods. Well, we decided that the woods was actually an estate of the aunt of Lysander that was called the Wood, right? So they went to this estate to go elope, and so a lot of the show also happens on location. We filmed it at this beautiful farm up in northeast corner of Connecticut, which has since closed, but it just worked, and Noah did a phenomenal job on all the editing, and we wanted it to get out there, and we wanted it to be something that could live beyond that particular like run of performances. Like, we ran it for a month. Now it exists on YouTube in perpetuity for free, and educators have been discovering it all over the country, right? And then recommending it to each other because they're like, this is the perfect way to anchor a unit on Shakespeare. It's fun, it's relevant, the kids get it, they laugh, it's bright. A lot of my students, my former improv students who I'd also directed musical theater, are the ones who are starring in it. So people their age, the kids' age that are watching it, are in it and doing a very phenomenal job. And so we're really proud of that. And that sort of helped us to define who we are and how we want to work. And collaborative work is the way for us, right?
Okay, let's hold that thought. I'm Deborah Gilbert. You are tuned in to Arts and Entertainment. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
Attending a local home show or garden expo can provide a one-stop opportunity to gather ideas and meet with potential contractors. Better Business Bureau reminds consumers of the importance of doing their homework before making a financial and contractual commitment. Always be sure that the company you decide to work with has the necessary licenses and insurance to work in Connecticut. Develop a list of questions ahead of time for potential contractors. Consider creating a separate email address for show correspondence. And before signing up for drawings, contests, or services, find out how your contact information will be used. Now, do not feel pressured to buy expensive items or services right away, as returns and refunds can be challenging. Save receipts and other paperwork. Pay for expensive merchandise with credit cards and monitor for unauthorized charges. BBB recommends limiting a deposit to no more than 1/3 of the total cost of the project and then setting up a schedule of payments based on the job's overall progress. Get all details of the project in writing in the form of a contract and request a receipt. Check for discounts and coupons being offered and research vendors at bbb.org.
Can we do the cast photo of photos?
And welcome back to Arts and Entertainment. I'm Deborah Gilbert, your host, and as always, thanks so much for being here. Well, we were talking during the break that Falsettos is coming up,
Yeah.
or is it the big deal that you folks want to talk about? So why don't we take that opportunity to do that? Jonna, go ahead.
Absolutely. So Falsettos is an incredible show. It's going to be happening in June. We have a bunch of information on the Fuse Theater website to get tickets. Tickets are live now, so you want to make sure you get them. I have been so blessed to play the role of Dr. Charlotte. I don't want to give away too much of the actual storyline or anything like that, but it's an incredibly touching, heartwarming show. It deals with a lot of things that I think really we need right now in our current climate. Relationships and love and loss and grieving, but also just family and spending a lot of time really discovering what that is to everybody, because we have such a unique cast of people that are really bringing these roles and portraying those people in such a beautiful, beautiful way. And Laura's doing a fantastic job with obviously directing that and helping us through that. So I'm sure she can tell you a little bit more about Falsettos and the exact dates and times and where to be there and all of that. but it is going to be in June. I believe opening night is the June 3rd. And then it runs for the 2 weekends, I believe. So then you can also have another chance to see it on the 10th and the 11th. So you want to make sure that you go to Fuse Theater, look us up, get those tickets now. As we already had 5 shows, you said, from a previous show sold out. I'm sure they will go very quickly. So you want to get those as soon as possible. But yeah, I'm very excited to be a part of the show right now.
While we're talking about how people can find you, let's talk about the website. What will the viewer find when they get there?
Sure. If you go to Fuse Theater with an R-E, CT.org, you will find on the front page, it says get your tickets here, a beautiful photo of the cast, information about when the show runs, what times, all of that, location. And then you can click on more info and then go into more depth about falsettos. Falsettos is a show that's really near and dear to my heart, and it goes back 30 years for me. In college, it was the show that we were all obsessed with, and we all went to New York to see when it was on Broadway. And not only that, but because of the show's themes, a lot of my friends who at that time, we're talking early 90s, were still really uncomfortable with expressing who they are. They started becoming more comfortable coming out, right? Because they had seen a musical, that we all loved, and they felt more acceptance, and that they would be safe in telling us, their friends. We were the first step to them embracing who they are, because the show does have LGBTQ themes in it, and it was just a watershed. So doing this show 30 years later, I just feel like I want to give back, and also because having all of us have experienced the pandemic, there is the theme of AIDS in the early 80s when no one knew what it was. And I lived through that. I was 11 in 1981, where the second act occurs. And I think a lot of times we forget what that was like. And now with gay marriage, unfortunately threatened again, I think it's important to remember that the people who lost loved ones to AIDS in the early 80s couldn't be with those loved ones because they weren't next of kin. And because we just went through that with the pandemic, so many people weren't able to be with their loved ones, I just want people to have a moment of empathy. This story is beautifully told. It's hilarious, it's effervescent, it's bright, it's vibrant, it's all those things. It is also really, really just like deeply moving. And I feel like having that human connection that the show offers is something that answers the question that we always ask ourselves at the outset of any production: why this play now? And for me, it was very clear that this was our next project.
Jonna, the actor who is watching us, and there are many in the arts and entertainment community that watch the program, what would your advice be to them? You went to school, workshops, school, organizations. How does an actor start getting going and get cast in a show?
Absolutely. I would say the biggest thing is, well, there's several things, but one of the biggest things for me was to create, to continue to create, to find my niche, to find something that I connected with on a very personal level. I also would say get out in your community, especially the past couple of years with COVID and everything that's happened. I mean, it hit our community like no other. And so now we're just sort of starting to kind of get back. I think that actors need to remember that reaching out to your community, your local theaters, even in choirs or things that you can find other artists and creatives to continue to create is incredibly important. And I would say the more that you invest yourself even locally, you'll now start to find connections in people that can lead you to the next steps of what you want to do. I feel like a lot of the time auditions can be scary for people, but if you have friends and connections that you can go to an audition together, grab a pal or someone who wants to get into theater, wants to get into writing or directing, or gather your friends together to get comfortable in those settings so that when you go to audition, you feel comfortable in that setting as well, and you can network with people there. And the more that you know people and the more that you get through those scenarios that might be, intimidating or scary for you, you will be so much happier to find yourself in New York City or in Los Angeles or wherever you are right now, auditioning for more people. And you'll feel more comfortable because you've put yourself in that position even locally. So I think it's really important to support your local theaters, your local artists, and to continue to create on your own is a huge, huge step. And I would also say, we talked a little bit earlier about this, having patience, because it's key right now, even just waiting on things to happen in the audition process, and keep going. You got to keep going. The more you create, the more you will find yourself in beautiful situations to meet new people and to put yourself in a position you want to be in.
And Laura, you mentioned director. To the audience that's watching right now and listening, saying, oh my God, I want to be a director. How does somebody pursue something like that?
Well, a lot of directors started out as actors or stage managers or a little bit of both, which was true of me. When I went to college, I was fortunate in that I went to 2 colleges. Actually, the first college I went to trained their theater majors to be directors because it was a small program. And so I got the training, but one of the things I noticed was that all of the books that we were reading, all the directors were men. And most of the theater majors were women. And we're like, are there going to be jobs for us? And the answer was largely no at the time. And educational theater was where women could get jobs as directors. So starting off as an actor, stage manager, studying directing, there is method to it. You have to know what you're doing. You have to know every aspect of theater in order to be a really effective director. And then, you know, taking jobs in educational theater, working with directors, being a stage manager to great directors, I learned an awful lot. Go to as much theater as possible, right? That was how I started. And now things are changing. Both in the theater and film and television industry, there are women directors now everywhere because we're actually making a concerted effort as a society to hear the stories of women, to give women an opportunity to tell stories from their lens, and it's getting better. The work is getting better because a greater diverse array of people are getting a chance to tell their stories. And so I don't know if I answered your question exactly, but the path is different for everyone. I can say that it was tough for me. It was hard. It was very circuitous, and I really had to carve my own niche, which is why starting a theater company where I could give opportunities to people like my younger self who was having a hard time finding a space, finding a niche, and getting opportunities. We're very much a stone soup approach to theater, which is like everyone brings, you bring a carrot, I bring an onion, someone else brings some chicken, some thyme and parsley, and suddenly we've got a really tasty soup that would have only been bland had it just been one person's vision, one person's voice. So the collaborative thing that started with Midsummer Night's Dream is really how we approach everything. And right now with Falsettos, it's interesting because it's a sung-through musical, and I've never directed a sung-through musical, so I wasn't sure how that works. And we hired an incredible choreographer in Paul Aguirre, and he has actually managed most of the staging. Like, so when I come in next week after my show is over, I'm in a show right now, Willy Wonka at Broadway on Main Haven. When I come in next week as director, I will have a beautiful foundation. The whole structure, the skeleton of the show will be there for me. And then I can come in and I can put, you know, muscle and bone and sinew and eyelashes and fingernails on it and really just mold it into something that is really beautiful. But Paul, as a choreographer, his vision, his movement language that he has in the show is just so much fun, and I cannot wait to dig in and start working with my incredible actors, Jonna Capone and a whole host of others. They're fantastic. We are very fortunate that we get really great cast with views.
That's good.
Yeah, we work really hard to find the right people and to make them feel really at home, and I hope that we achieve that. Everyone should always feel comfortable and respected as and a part of the process. Like we welcome that. I want to know what you bring to the table, and I want to use it. You know, so.
We are starting to run out of time. Briefly, what does the calendar look like for 2023, 2024? Have you thought about other work that you'd like to do once the show is over? Jonna?
Honestly, I would love to work with Fuse in the future again. Again, like I said, this will be my first production here in Connecticut, and I could not be more thrilled with this, that it has been this experience and so welcoming and exciting. I'm going out to LA for some TV film stuff in the next couple of weeks, so I'm shooting some stuff out there. But other than that, I would love to see any sort of new faces in Fuse and to work with some new people and to work with some new material with them. So hopefully looking forward to that 2024 season. So yeah.
How about you, briefly?
So in 2024, we are currently writing grants for a project called what we call Pay What You Can Theater. We're hoping to engage a larger venue where we can open it up to larger families or people who couldn't necessarily afford to go see theater as a pay what you can, and we're trying to do something kind of epic, so stay tuned for that. We're sort of a one show at a time company because we like to really put all of our creative energy into the one show. So right now the focus is on falsettos, but now we're looking for funding and sponsorships for that. And stay tuned because it's going to be cool.
Okay. Well, ladies, thank you so much for being here today. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Thanks
We wish
so
you all
much.
the very best with what's coming up.
Thanks for having
Yes.
us.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Come see
I'm Deborah
falsettos.
Gilbert. You've been tuned in Arts and Entertainment. I thank you so much for being here today. I hope you have a super day. See you next time.